Good morning and welcome to the Daily Dose on this Wednesday, February, what day is it? 3rd, February 3rd. It's a crazy time, isn't it? Today I want to talk about the generational curse and family mapping and family backgrounds. I've had the opportunity to visit with many couples over the years. Some that are going to get married and they want premarital counseling. Others that have been married maybe a few years and are just going through a struggle and wanting to have some tools into their tool belt to help them through some different types of difficulties that they may be going through. And I have a tool that I use, an assessment that I use to help them through that. For a couple, it costs, I think, $35-40, and we have an opportunity to walk through some conversations. And it's mostly creating conversations. It's about trying to understand who each person is. And I don't think that you're too old to do this. I think sometimes we get into marriage and we're 10, 15, 20, 50 years into marriage, and we've just grown accustomed to some things, but it eats at us. Or we've got those underlying issues that are going on that we've just neglected to deal with, and now we feel too much shame to deal with, or we feel like, well, I don't want to bring it up now. I should have brought that up 15 years ago. But the problem is that marriages crumble under the weight of that kind of stress and under that kind of shame and under that kind of guilt. Marriages can crumble underneath the weight of unresolved feelings and unresolved maybe bitterness or envy or difficulty, or that one thing that you've worked really hard to just ignore, but it just aggravates the mess out of you. That happens to all of us. If we don't have communication in our relationships, these things can break down. It can break down in homes. It can break down in friendships. It can break down in parent-child relationships. You can find these similar kinds of things even among employees or staff or pastors and churches or churches and pastors or anywhere. Anywhere that there's a relationship that is important and a relationship that needs to be congenial, these things can happen. But I want to talk about mostly our at-home relationships, because each one of us has a suitcase that's packed full of items from our past. Now, some of us may have buried it deep in the garage underneath some other things. Some of us may have buried it deep in a back closet, and others of us might even keep it by the front door. And we see it every day. We deal with it every day. And if we ever get under stress, and my goodness, have we not had stress in the last year? I mean, COVID has created new forms of stress. I know couples that are struggling right now because they had a rhythm. They both went off to work, or one went off to work, and now they're at home working. They have the at-home offices. Kids are now at home. Maybe they're on virtual, or maybe they shifted over to homeschooling. And it's a stress, and things are stressful. And what happens in those moments of stress and just stress, little stress that moves into high stress, anxiety sets in. And what happens is we drag out this suitcase of our background, and we open it up and we begin to clothe ourselves emotionally. We clothe ourselves in communication based upon some things that have been passed down to us over the generations. It might not be just from your parents. It could be from your parents who got it from their grandparents who got it from their grandparents. I mean, a famous story that's humorous, but it displays some of these things. Little Katie went to her mom and said, "Hey, Mom, can I help you in the kitchen cook dinner?" "Well, absolutely, Katie, why not?" And so They get in the kitchen and mom's going to cook a ham, and she cuts off the ends of the ham, puts it in the roasting pan, and Katie asked a question. Hey, Mommy, why do we cut the ends off our ham? Well, you know what, honey? I don't know why we do that. Why don't you go ask your grandmother? So she asks her grandmother. She calls her on the phone and asks her, hey, Grandma, why do we cut the ends off of our ham? And Grandma sat and she thought about it, and she said, I don't know. I've just always done it. That's what great-grandma told me to do. Why don't you call great-grandma? And the story goes that she goes and calls great-grandma and says, why do you cut the ends of the ham? She said, because I didn't have a pan big enough to put the ham in. And yet, that one little thing had been passed down. There was a big enough pan in the house, but there had just been this process that had been handed down from generation to generation, modeled for them, maybe unbeknownst to them, modeled for them, and they took it and they didn't think they could ever change. I mean, you've got a huge pan, but you still cut the ends off the ham. Why? Because it just been passed down to you. I think sometimes the way that we react with our spouses, the way we react with our kids, we as kids, the way we react to our parents, comes from modeling that's been shown to us, and in high stress times, these things can come to a sense of extreme. And we have to realize that we've had stuff passed down to us. Maybe it's called family mapping, and I do this with couples a lot, and I've done it with many couples. A lot of times in premarital, to help conversations, to help a young couple understand. You've spent your teenage years and possibly your college years trying to fiercely deny that you have anything like your parents. I mean, this is a typical teenage move, isn't it? And even now, it's a typical young adult, early 20s move. They are trying to be so independent that they are fiercely denying anything like I'm not like you, I don't want to be like you, I'm not going to be like you, until they hit about 25 and they move into their 30s, and now they have a spouse and they've got 2 kids. Their life is a mess. They don't know what to do. They may go to church and love Jesus, and they're trying to make ends meet. And when the stress rises, they become like their parents. There's a whole Geico commercial about how not to become your parents. And, it's funny and we laugh at it, but here's the reality. This is what happens. There has been an emotional, relational modeling, spiritual modeling that has been handed down, and we have to be careful. What are we handing down? First of all, what am I putting in the suitcase? What am I carrying? What baggage am I carrying from prior generations because I've never taken the time to actually deal with it? In fact, I've used statements like, that's just who I am. There's no changing me now. Hey, love me or leave me. I don't even care. I mean, we make these kinds of statements, sometimes in jest, sometimes out of anger. And it's simply because we don't have the tools to handle, how do I make this kind of change? You say, Aaron, why are you talking to me about this pop psychology stuff? Let's just talk about Scripture. Funny you should mention this. In the last couple of weeks, we've been reading about Abraham and Sarah, and we've been reading about how they had Ishmael, and that wasn't good. And then they had Isaac, and you've got Sarah and Hagar that are fighting with one another. You're going to have Isaac and Ishmael that have a cold relationship with each other. I wonder where they saw this happen. I wonder why these have a poor relationship. It's because their moms have a poor relationship. And they're going to have a difficulty in this kind of relationship. Well, then we've learned about Isaac and Rebekah, and we're going to come into Jacob and Esau, and then you're going to have the 12 sons of Jacob. And what we're going to see here is a fascinating look at how this family dynamic passed down some baggage that created all kinds of problems for the generations to come. And you that are listening, maybe watching, you're listening, I want you to understand a couple of things. Taking baggage and handing down baggage is a real thing. It's reality. We've all done it. We're all still doing it unless we have a full transformation in our lives by the power of God through faith in Jesus Christ. Now, I'm not saying that putting my faith into Jesus Christ exonerates me from baggage. What it does is it just empowers me to be able to change, and it empowers me to be able to unpack the baggage in a healthy environment, to deal with it, and to not hand down that stuff to my kids. I can pass down and hand down other things to my kids, hopefully some positive things to my kids. You can pass things down to your kids, to your grandkids. And I believe that the power of God is so strong that it doesn't matter how far gone it may be. It doesn't matter how far into life you might be. There's still hope, and there's still time, and there's still opportunity for you to find some transformation in your heart that can then seek to transform and empower the generations that are behind you. Where do I see this in Scripture? Well, let's look at this for a second. Abraham is making a life-changing decision in Genesis 11 and 12 as his dad dies, and he's leaving his entire family to go to a place to follow God. Okay, that's cool. God tells him, hey, you've got... this is your promise. I'm promising you that this is going to happen. But then they get into some struggles. They get into some issues. And Abraham's like, well, we've got a famine, and I don't know what we should do. Can I trust that we're going to have food? What I find interesting is God comes to Isaac and says, we have a famine, don't go to Egypt. What we find when it's Abraham, though, his dad, years ago, God didn't tell him to go to Egypt. He didn't ask God. Abraham, just in his own logic, said, hey, this is what we've got to do. Survivor. Okay. We take pride in being a survivor, don't we, guys? But the reality is what we can do is create such a self-sufficiency, and we can pass that on to our kids that becomes an unhealthy environment. Then we come to this moment in Genesis 20 to 22 where Abraham's being put on the test. Hey, I need you to take your son, your only son, Isaac, and I need you to go up to this mountain, and I need you to sacrifice him. Now, we look at Abraham and go, he's just being obedient, man. Don't trash on Abraham. He's just being obedient. That's exactly right. But did he ever talk to Isaac about this? Because think about it from Isaac's perspective. Isaac, he's the one being bound. He's the one being placed on the altar. He's the one that is going to be, he's the one that's watching the sun glint off the knife as it rises above his chest. Yes, he hears God saying, no, stop. I understand that you would do anything I ask, and that's awesome, but don't do this. And they find the ram and they celebrate, and Isaac gets to go home. But I think there's something that's stuck there, and I'm not blaming God for this. What I'm saying is that strict obedience and the modeling that he would have seen in Abraham, Isaac takes on. Isaac goes to Egypt, lies about Rebekah. Isaac is coming to a point, and I find it in Genesis 26, and I think it's verse 33 or 35, where Esau, they have Jacob and Esau, okay? They're 40. They're not kids, they're 40. Esau takes a wife outside of the spiritual structure and landscape, and it creates bitterness for Isaac and Rebekah. Now, the thing I find interesting is Isaac comes from a family that is highly obedient, sorta, right? I mean, they struggle, then they get real obedient, and okay, we're only going to do this, okay? And so he comes out of this structure of a family. Rebekah, however, and we find this as you continue reading, Rebekah, whose brother is Laban, who he and Jacob are trying to con one another for a number of years. I mean, you remember what happens. Laban's like, hey, yeah, you work 7 years, you can have my daughter. And on the wedding night, Laban slips in the older child and, oh, hey, we can't do it this way. I'm sorry, dude. You're going to have to work another 7 years if you want Rebekah. Oh, my goodness. Laban, shrewd businessman. This is Rebekah's brother. Where do you think Laban learned how to do this? He probably learned it from his dad. Rebekah, you get to chapter 26 or 27 in Genesis, and Isaac being the obedient, Esau is creating bitterness and strife. The Bible says this. At 40, he's breaking his mama's heart. He's breaking his daddy's heart. And yet Isaiah is coming out of such an obedience mentality that he's coming to the end of his life. And he wants to pull Esau in. He was the firstborn by a few minutes, but it made all the difference, didn't it? And he said, you need to go get some stew and I'll bless you when you get back. Rebekah overhears this. Now, Rebekah comes from a shrewd family background. Rebekah comes from a pragmatic background. Doesn't necessarily come from this, obedience, got to do it because it's just the tradition we do. She comes out of a background that says, what's the best process here? So she pulls Jacob aside and says, look, hey, son, this is what you need. This is what we're going to do. But you just do what your mama says. All right? You just do what mama tells you. I'll take the heat for this one. Sends Jacob in, cons Isaac, and he blesses him. Esau comes back. Isaac is frustrated. What am I going to do? I don't understand. Esau is hot. He's mad. And Rebekah says, hey, you need to leave, Jacob, because I think when the time of grieving is done, y'all are going to have some issues here. I mean, Esau's said, I'm going to kill you, brother. I'm going to kill you. Where does that come from? Well, hadn't been that many generations ago that you had one brother that felt scorned by another brother. This stuff of humanity and emotion and personality, this stuff, we pass it down. And so you've got Isaac that is dealing with this sense of obedience, and his family map is, we're going to do it this way, and this is how we've got to do it. Rebekah comes in a different way, and we see it played out in the kids' lives. And Esau and Jacob, they don't have a relationship for a number of years. And what does Isaac do? Isaac then goes and he cons Laban, doesn't he? And we spiritualize this and say, oh, but it was the hand of God. That's true. But Jacob, the name Jacob means liar. I mean, technically supplanter, but it means a liar, a cheat. And it wasn't until he wrestled with the angel and he had a moment with God. He had a moment with God. And in that moment, Jacob's entire life changed. He got a new name. He had a new purpose. He had a new identity. He was a different person. And he came back as Israel, not as Jacob. And he would have 12 sons, and they would have difficulty, and yet still the family baggage. Because who was his favorite? He had a favorite, didn't he? His favorite was Joseph. Joseph and the coat of many colors, And he played favorites. This stuff's for real, folks. We got to be careful with what we are passing down to our kids because they are watching us. They may fiercely deny everything about you from the age of 12 to 22. I'm not you. I'm not going to be you. I don't want to be you. But they're going to become who they've seen for all these years. Who are you showing them? Oh, well, they're 35 and 40. They've got their own kids, and their own, my grandkids are now going through. It's never too late, my friends. It's never too late to trust God, to let him adjust you in a way that needs to be. Have you ever fully considered that suitcase that you've carried around full of emotional, psychological, modeling baggage for all of these years that's been handed down from generation to generation, and you, unbeknownst to yourself, took it upon you, and you've carried that with you all these years? It's time that we unpack it. It's time that we stop cutting off the ends of the ham and just take care of what needs to be taken care of today. And it's a prayer away. It's a decision away. That's the hope. It's the hope I want to give you today. You're not too far gone. You're not too far away. Your life is not too far. It's time. A change can be made today that could affect generations to come. What are you going to do? Y'all have a great day.